Jock Paul Freeman is a young Australian who has spent the past 11 years in jail in Bulgaria for allegedly murdering the son of a prominent politician. He was travelling in Sofia, Bulgaria on holiday when he was 21 with his friends while he was on leave from the British Army. What unfolded one fateful night was that Jock watched as a group of 13 drunk neo-Nazis pursued a Roma gypsy, hounding him and beating him. As the man lay there on the ground, Jock stepped in to defend him, pushing away anyone who came near. The group of 13 then turned on him. Jock held a knife above his head and told everyone to back off, but they didn't. They hit him on the back of his head with rocks and knocked him unconscious. A video released just this week for the first time after 11 years supports this account that Jock has given the entire time. He says he awoke to find police arresting him. The son of a prominent Bulgarian politician had been stabbed and murdered, and Jock claims he had no recollection of this ever happening and says it would have been unlikely for him to have been able to commit this crime with 13 men against him and him on his own. There were also no traces of blood were ever found on his clothes or on his knife. Yet, despite this, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison for murder and attempted murder, and he's been fighting to get out ever since. Now, this case has made international headlines, but it's barely registered in Australia, even though Jock grew up in Sydney and went to one of the best private schools, St Ignatius, Riverview. In recent days, Jock has accused the Australian government of letting him down. He said he gave up hope that they could get him out of prison years ago, which is understandable. It was several days before anyone from DFAT even had contact with him when he was first arrested. And usually, I'm led to believe that this would happen within hours. But now the Australian government has stepped up its efforts. The story is Jock in prison for 11 years for a crime he says he doesn't commit, and the evidence would seem to now support it. 2 weeks ago, he was finally granted parole for good behaviour. But in an unprecedented move, he has now been thrown into an immigration detention centre and prosecutors are trying to block his parole. This was a move organised by the murdered boy's father, Monov, who is a politician in the corrupt Bulgarian government. Now, the injustice of this case has seen Jock win some high-profile support. Joining me now for exclusive interviews are two of Jock's champions who've been working for years behind the scenes to see him walk free from prison. They are international human rights lawyer Jeffrey Robertson, who joins me now live on the phone from London. Jeffrey, do you believe Jock Paul Freeman received a fair trial in the Bulgarian courts?
Sorry, I don't. I think he was wrongly convicted. And he was sentenced to 20 years in prison with a right to parole after 10 years. Now, I think you've got to understand, perhaps the one thing that Australians don't know, that this guy is incredibly brave. Instead of giving up in despair, no support from Australia, we don't have an embassy in Bulgaria, we have no clout there, he became leader of the prisoners' rights movement, and he has achieved extraordinary. I mean, prisons in Bulgaria and Eastern Europe were appalling 10 years ago, and he has fought through local cases, through taking cases to the European Court of Human Rights to improve conditions for prisoners, and he has achieved remarkable success. He's a human rights hero, along with the Bulgarian Helsinki Committee, which has supported him, and they have achieved great human rights improvements in prisons throughout Eastern Europe. So really we should be giving him an Order of Australia. He's an Australian who has parlayed depression, the terrible 10 years in a hideous prison, and has made something of his life and has put aside his personal tragedy to help others. And now he faces the wrath of the Bulgarian government, which has moved to the right. It's got this hideous neo-fascist partner, the Bulgarian National Movement, who's now has a prime minister and 3 ministers in the government, and they've demanded the Prosecutor General appeal against the court which has ordered him to be released on parole, which is his right. And that appeal will be heard by judges on Monday. And the judges are under enormous political pressure. There are demonstrations.
Well, I just want to ask you about the political pressure. How much of that is from the father of the boy who was murdered? He's a prominent politician, and how much pressure do you believe he's been exerting behind the scenes?
And he's even threatened to have Jock assassinated if he comes out of prison. Plays into this.
Sorry, can I just clarify that? He's threatened to have Jock assassinated if he comes out of prison.
Well, it has been taken up by this neo-fascist faction of the government, which has put pressure on the Prosecutor General to make the appeal that will be heard on Monday. And it is worse than Jock. They have targeted Jock's, the Helsinki committee, which Jock works with, and have demanded it be closed down. It's the leading human rights group in the country. And this is extremely worrying. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty have just issued reports about the enormous concern at closing down, the government trying to close down the only real human rights group in Bulgaria that has, because they have worked with Jock and have supported his right to parole. So Jock's case has become a real political issue.
Now, and especially more so because there's local elections coming up. But Jeffrey Robertson, I just want to ask you about the original trial, the court case, when Jock was sentenced to 20 years. I understand that during the court case, the prosecution said there was no violence leading up to the stabbing. But the video that has just been released doesn't support that account. And you can clearly see that he was under attack from a group of 13 men. What has been the response from the courts when you and Jock's other lawyers have raised this?
Well, none at all. The Prosecutor General, who is this old Stalinist figure, because Bulgaria didn't actually fully reform when it came out of the Soviet Union, has enormous power, and he has refused to reconsider the case on the basis of this fresh evidence. It's quite clear that there were 13 perhaps drunken young men who were threatening a couple of Roma people, the gypsy.
And we're watching that vision now for anyone watching. We're watching that vision now of them threatening Jock. Yep.
Yes, I can't, of course,
see it. No, but what about the other?
It does
Jeffrey
show
Robertson?
that it was a melee in which Jock, as a young soldier on leave from the British Army, was trying to calm things down and protect the people, the couple of Roma figures who were actually under threat. So it was certainly something that wouldn't have got him convicted in an Australian court.
And what about the other exculpatory evidence that was also suppressed, like the fact that there was no blood found on Jock's clothes or on his knife? Was this presented in court 11 years ago?
No, not effectively. And there was a great deal of popular pressure to have him convicted 11 years ago. But that is not the issue today. The issue is that he is entitled under Bulgarian law to parole. And a year late, the courts gave him parole. The Court of Appeal approved his parole. And so he should be free to fly to London, where he'll be welcomed by the Australian High Commission, and he'll be put on a plane to Australia on Tuesday. But that may not now happen, because on Monday, the Prosecutor General, this enormously powerful Stalinist figure, is asking the court, for the Supreme Court, which has no role in parole decisions, to negative, to quash the Court of Appeal decision and put Jock back to prison for 10 years. So it's a pretty extraordinary and unlawful, in my view, procedure, which is going to happen on Monday, and we must just keep our fingers crossed that the judges are strong enough to resist all this popular government and prosecutor general pressure and do the right thing and uphold the Court of Appeal judgment or refuse to get involved. They're not an appropriate appeal procedure, and so Jock can be put on a plane the next day.
Geoffrey Robertson, before Monday, obviously, as you've just described, it's a crucial day. What would you like Prime Minister Scott Morrison to do to help Jock before then?
Well, I think that it's difficult for Australia because we have no embassy in Sofia, in the country. We have, I think, and this was the sensible way, tried to engage the British Foreign Office, which do have some clout there, even before Brexit, to ask that diplomatically that the parole law be upheld, that the rule of law should follow in Bulgaria, and that Jock's right to parole should be upheld. I think that otherwise the danger to human rights in Bulgaria could be dealt with perhaps by Australia making a donation to the Human Rights Committee, the Bulgarian Helsinki Committee. You can donate to it even online, partly as thanks for their courageous support of Jock. They have come under threat, and partly to ensure that they can fight the government's attempt to close them down. I think that would probably be the best way for Australia to assist. But it should, of course, make the most forceful protest it can against
in your view,
Bulgaria.
has the government done enough so far?
That is something that I no doubt will come out later. The important thing is that the Australian government and DFAT pull out all stops. They don't have many. They could certainly work through the United Kingdom, but they could, I think, protest most vehemently about if the decision goes the wrong way on Monday. They could certainly protest vehemently against the behavior, the unlawful behavior of the Prosecutor General, and they could, as I say, make a foreign aid donation to the Bulgarian Helsinki Committee, which is leading the fight, the good fight, for the rule of law and human rights in this Eastern European country, which most of us think should never have been admitted to the European Union, and that is a matter that needs to be taken up with our European allies if the case goes the wrong way and Bulgarian law is distorted by its own courts.
Geoffrey Robertson, thank you so much for your time on a Friday morning in London. I'm very grateful for it, and I imagine it's going to be a tense weekend.
All the best, Shari. We'll keep our fingers crossed.